Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer, and today, as part of my B-Tier guides for Dragon Age Origins, I'm doing something quite different. I want to show you a build inspired by Duncan, the Grey Warden commander who recruits you at the beginning of the game and acts as your mentor for a little bit before, spoilers, he dies fighting the Darkspawn. It's up to you to carry his legacy forward, and what better way to honor Duncan than by fighting the way he did. Duncan doesn't just appear in Dragon Age Origins, he's also one of the main characters of Dragon Age The Calling, a novel written by David Gator that takes place around 20 years before the events of Origins. Duncan's class isn't entirely clear. In The Calling, he's described as a dark-skinned rogue carrying twin silverite daggers, but in Origins we can see him with a sword and a dagger. There is also Duncan's shield in the Denerim Grey Warden Vault, which is a possible gift for Alistair, but we don't know whether Duncan actually used it. For my build, I'm focusing on Duncan as a dual-wielder rogue. Dual-wielder because he's consistently fighting with two weapons in both the game and novel, and rogue because he's shown as someone with pickpocketing expertise. Now that Duncan's fighting style and class are settled, let's get into the build. You can choose any origin you'd like for your rogue. I personally find a city elf appropriate because Duncan has a soft spot for people who come from poor or criminal backgrounds, and because you get a weapon as a gift from him, the Borrowed Longsword. We'll want to use a longsword in our build to honor Duncan, and the Borrowed Longsword is great in the early game. Depending on the race you choose for your warden, you'll get some different starting attribute bonuses. And from choosing the rogue class, you'll get bonuses of +4 dexterity, +2 willpower, and +4 cunning. You also get 5 attribute points to spend as you wish. In addition to the usual dex and cunning, you'll need strength to wield longswords and to wear the medium armor I'll recommend. For your starting 5 attribute points, I recommend putting 2 in strength, 2 in dexterity, and 1 in cunning. Cunning isn't a super high priority in the beginning, as having higher strength and dexterity to equip upgrades for our gear is going to have a much higher impact early. For starting skills, you have 2 skills from your origin, plus a free point. The City Elf Rogue starts with Coercion and Poison Making. I recommend putting a point in Combat Training. When you get to level 2, you can also get a point in Stealing to have that as well, but it's better to have access to Tier 1 weapon talents as you get through the origin if you want to take the violent route through the estate. For starting abilities, every origin and class combination has a particular ability unlocked. The City Elf Rogue's ability is Dirty Fighting. It's a great talent that can stun any enemy that isn't immune to stun effects because there's no check to resist it. For your other 2 points, I recommend unlocking Dual Weapon Sweep and Deft Hands. Dual Weapon Sweep is one of the best dual-wielding talents. It damages all enemies in a cone in front of you, so unlock it right away. Deft Hands, together with the rest of this row, will allow your rogue to unlock doors and chests and disarm traps. Very important to have from early on, as you don't want to miss out on both the XP from unlocking or disarming, as well as on the loot you can get from behind a locked door or from inside a chest. The City Elf can acquire some decent starting gear during their origin. First is the sword Duncan gives you, the Borrowed Longsword. It's a Tier 1 longsword that doesn't have any strength requirements to equip, and it has a +1 to armor penetration and +6 attack. You can find leather armor as well as medium chainmail armor inside the estate alongside other items, so I highly recommend you go into all the side rooms, kill all the guards, and loot everything you see. There's also a strong early game shield you could give to Alistair, the Denerim Guard Shield. It doesn't have any special properties, but it is a heavy shield, so it has much better stats for a tank than an early kite shield or other small shield. The Fencer's Cinch Belt is also a decent pickup, granting +4 attack, but of course if you have DLC items in your starting inventory, it's likely you'll have something much better to use already as a belt. The main attributes to focus on for the rogue are still going to be dexterity and cunning, with the added note that you will need 31 strength to equip Duncan's sword and 34 strength if you want to equip the highest tier medium armor, Wade's Superior Dragonskin set. If you don't care about crafting and using Wade's medium armor, stick with the 31 strength for Duncan's sword. You'll be able to equip the other good medium armors without issue. In terms of increasing your strength, you can get a few attribute points from the Fade quest if you interact with all of the attribute fonts or otherwise use the Skip the Fade mod. If you find all the fonts, you'll get a +4 to your strength. You can also equip various pieces of gear that give you bonuses to strength, allowing you to more easily equip gear with strength requirements. You will still need to put a decent amount of points in strength, but remember that dexterity is important for rogue and dual weapon abilities, and cunning is very useful for many rogue talents. Taking inspiration from Duncan, the 3 main skills I recommend are Combat Training, Stealing, and Coercion. Duncan is a skilled fighter, so maxing out combat training is a priority, but he is also good at persuading or intimidating others, so coercion is definitely a skill he makes good use of as a commander. Finally, stealing is not a skill I usually recommend in my builds, but Duncan used to be a pickpocket himself and still sees the value of having quick fingers as evidenced by his encouragement/advice given to a warden who gets caught stealing in Ostagar. While stealing isn't the best skill, as a rogue you get a skill point every 2 levels instead of every 3 levels like the other classes, so you might as well make use of the extra skill points for this. There are some targets you can steal good items for, if not in terms of the item stats, at least useful to sell. The quartermaster at Ostagar has a belt called Hardy's Belt, which offers +1 constitution. You can steal the Imperium crossbow from the unscrupulous merchant outside in Lothering. You can find more profitable targets to steal from on the Dragon Age Wiki if you look on the stealing page under the notable thefts section. There will be a link to the stealing profitable targets page there. There's a link to this page in the video description if you're interested. I want to note that some unique stealing targets are properly implemented by Quinn's Ultimate DAO Fixback mod. The mod restores a few items which should be stolen, such as Gregor's shield stolen from the Knight Commander himself in the Circle Tower, or the Nugbane crossbow being stealable from the Mines Commander in Orzammar. Of course, Quinn's Fixback fixes a lot more stuff than that, but it was relevant to mention it in relation to the stealing skill. Other than maxing out combat training, coercion, and stealing, I think Duncan would have a good survival skill, considering his warden duties include exploring the deep roads and traversing other wild areas. It's also a skill that works well with the lore of Grey Wardens being able to sense Starspawn. You'll be able to sense other types of enemies as well, but a good commander always keeps an eye and ear out for their surroundings. Once you're done with your 3 main skills, you can put the rest of your points into survival for the extra nature resistance as well as being able to see nearby enemies on the map. In terms of abilities, we unfortunately don't see Duncan using any actual talents from the game in the cutscenes where he fights Darkspawn. He seems to have a duelist-like fighting style, preferring to fight one-on-one against an enemy, which we'll get to in the specialization section, but otherwise he's just using a dagger, sword, or 2 daggers when he fights. From the dual weapons tree, I recommend unlocking the first 3 passives in the first row. The bonuses from these will greatly improve the experience of fighting with 2 weapons. Dual weapon training makes the offhand weapon gain an additional 25% attribute bonus. Dual weapon finesse grants a bonus of +5 attack and defense while wielding 2 weapons. Dual weapon expert grants a bonus of +2.5 melee critical chance, as well as dealing 7 bleeding damage to a target you hit over the next 5 seconds. The bleeding damage is supposed to scale with character level, but in the vanilla game it doesn't. However, if you have the Dane's Fixes mod on PC, you can fix this and get it to scale so that the damage stays relevant at higher levels. From the next row, I recommend getting Riposte and Cripple, as they are useful damaging talents. In order to unlock them, you will have to first unlock Dual Striking, which will be useless for this build. Riposte has a chance to stun the target unless it passes a physical resistance check against the rogue's cunning score. If the target is stunned, the second hit of Riposte will be a critical hit. I found this to be a great talent to use on elite or lower rank enemies that aren't immune to being stunned, because it will essentially guarantee a critical hit and a stun, which you can take advantage of as a rogue. It's a fairly cheap ability to use too. Cripple is another great damaging talent due to having a +5 to attack, as well as being an auto crit if it hits. It inflicts penalties of -40% movement speed and -10 to attack and defense to the target, unless it passes a physical resistance check against a rogue's strength score. I usually wouldn't recommend Cripple in a rogue build because rogues tend to wear light armor and only use daggers, thus not putting many points in strength. But with this build, you'll have a good strength score, so you can use Cripple to debuff your enemies. There's another talent I don't usually recommend that's great for this build, Punisher. You make 3 blows against the target, dealing normal damage for the first 2 strikes, and generating critical hits for the final blow, which is done with both weapons if they manage to hit. The target suffers penalties of -10 attack and defense for 20 seconds, and is knocked down if it fails a physical resistance check against the attacker's strength score. Again, usually rogues wouldn't have enough strength for this debuff to work, but this build does. It also looks cool. From the final row, dual weapon sweep and momentum are amazing. You'll already have dual weapon sweep unlocked from the start if you followed my recommendation, so you'll need to unlock flurry so that you can get momentum. I wouldn't waste my stamina on flurry, as the damage it does just isn't good enough. Momentum increases your attack speed while having a -2 penalty to your stamina regeneration, so in order to use it, you need to ensure that you have some bonuses to combat stamina regeneration. This shouldn't be too hard to achieve. From the rogue abilities, you'll already have Dirty Fighting, which is a great and cheap stun. Combat Movement and Coup de Grace are very useful for a dual-wielding rogue. Combat Movement grants a wider angle from which you can backstab enemies. Coup de Grace ensures that you will inflict automatic backstabs against enemies that are stunned or paralyzed. This works well in combination with various abilities that can stun, such as Dirty Fighting and Riposte, Paralyze Runes or poisons that can stun enemies, and other abilities from your allies that can either stun, paralyze, or petrify an enemy. Normally, I would recommend unlocking lethality from the second row. It offers plus 10% melee crit chance and allows the rogue to use their cunning score instead of strength as a damage modifier if their cunning is higher. While the crit chance bonus is great, you won't have such a high cunning score to take advantage of the other part of this passive. You may honestly be better off to focus more on strength and dexterity to increase your damage and just put enough points in cunning to be able to unlock all the abilities you want, up to 22 or so cunning. Sure, the plus 10% melee crit chance is nice, but depending on your character, it may just not be all that important. You'll be easily able to backstab enemies if you can stun or immobilize them, and otherwise you have abilities which are automatic crits. I am recommending lethality only as an optional unlock because of this, as well as because to unlock it, you first need below the belt and deadly strike, which aren't very good. If you find yourself with extra talent points to spare, go ahead and unlock this and the next talent, evasion, but otherwise focus on the abilities I've mentioned previously. Evasion is a nice ability, offering a special standalone 20% chance to dodge attacks with a special dodge animation, but it's by no means required, and it requires the same abilities plus lethality being unlocked first. It's an optional unlock if you really want it and have the points due to getting to a very high level or purchasing tomes that give you extra talent points. Unless you're planning on having a second rogue in your party for unlocking and disarming purposes, I do recommend you max out the Deft Hands tree because it will help you out a lot to be able to unlock doors and chests and disarm traps. If you have a second rogue in your party, then you don't need to put more than the initial 1 point into Deft Hands. You can just max out this ability row on your second rogue so that your warden can focus on combat-oriented abilities instead. The only specialization that works with Duncan's fighting style is Duelist, so this build will be a 1 specialization build. I think that the Legionnaire Scout specialization from the Awakening expansion would also work well, so if you take your character further into that expansion, that's the second specialization I recommend. From the Duelist talents, unlock all of them. The Dueling Sustained grants a bonus of plus 10 to attack while the mode is active, as well as to defense once you unlock the Keen Defense passive. It doesn't take much stamina to keep it active, so have it sustained at all times. Upset Balance is a debuffing ability that imposes a minus 20% movement speed and minus 20 defense penalty to the target unless it passes a physical resistance check versus the Duelist cunning score. You may not be able to very easily impose this penalty due to your cunning score being lower than other rogues, but it's still worth using in case it works. Keen Defense adds a plus 10 defense bonus to your Dueling Sustained. Finally, Pinpoint Strike is amazing to use against elite or boss level enemies because it makes all your warden's successful attacks against this target be critical hits for the next 15 seconds. Elites and bosses are harder to stun or immobilize due to having higher resistances or immunities, so using Pinpoint Strike will allow you to deal a lot of damage to them without relying on backstabs, which may be more difficult to pull off. In terms of gear, we're going in an interesting direction with medium armor, or medium plus piecemeal armor. Unfortunately, we don't have access to Duncan's cool metal plus fabric armor that he wears, so we'll have to make do with what the game gives us. I think Duncan's armor reads more like medium armor than light, so that's what I decided to go for with this build. This is also part of my agenda to get people to use medium armor more, as it's my favorite armor type in Origins. We'll talk about specific armor pieces in a bit, because first I want to talk about weapons. The best weapons are of course Duncan's sword and Duncan's dagger, which we can get from the Return to Ostagar DLC. If you'd like to try to get the tier 6 Silverite versions, which Duncan seems to be using himself, I recommend going to Ostagar somewhere between level 11 and 15, though I can't guarantee you'll get the Silverite version as I couldn't find information anywhere online about exactly which character levels are tied to tier 6. Duncan's sword has plus 3 willpower, plus 3 cunning, plus 2 combat stamina regen, plus 4 damage versus darkspawn, as well as 2 rune slots. It's a great sword for this build in particular as it gives you the stamina regeneration you need to keep momentum sustained with no issues, as well as otherwise having good bonuses. Duncan's dagger is slightly less useful than his sword, but it's still the main weapon I recommend using for this build if you're committed to honoring Duncan. The dagger has plus 4 dexterity, plus 10% critical or backstab damage, and plus 10 damage versus dragons, and it has 2 to 3 rune slots. The damage versus dragons property is nice, but you only get to kill very few dragons in the whole game, and otherwise that property is useless. There is a third weapon that used to belong to Duncan, and which he gave to Valendrian, the Elder of the Elves in the Denrim alienage, the Gift of the Grey. It's not a very good dagger, not even as good as Duncan's dagger. It's tier 6 and it has a plus 5% melee crit chance bonus and 2 rune slots. You won't be able to get this dagger if you are a city elf because you will instead get the Fang dagger from your father. If you choose a different origin, however, you will get Gift of the Grey and can use it if you prefer the crit chance bonus instead of the bonuses given by Duncan's dagger, while still using one of Duncan's weapons. Now, just because these specifically are Duncan's weapons doesn't mean we have to use them in our Duncan-inspired build. For a city elf, the Fang dagger given to your warden by their father could be a wonderful choice. However, there is an issue with this dagger. In the vanilla version of the PC game, it only has +6 attack and +6 damage versus beasts, as opposed to the amazing console version of the dagger, which has +3 cunning, +5% melee crit chance, +6 attack, +10% critical and backstab damage, and +1 nature damage. Thankfully, if you're using Quinn's Ultimate DAO Fixback, then you'll get the cool version instead. I would absolutely recommend using this version of the dagger if you get it. It's super powerful and is a family heirloom, having belonged to your warden's mother, Adaya. Finally, another great dagger thematically is the tier 6 version of Thorn of the Dead Gods. The Thorns of the Dead Gods are daggers made out of 3 metal shards from a grey warden blade that shattered when it killed the archdemon Toth. The tier 6 version is the best one, offering +3 damage and +3 armor penetration, as well as 2 rune slots. You can obtain this dagger at the end of the Drifter's Cache quest in the Deep Roads. I don't think it's the best dagger by any means, but it fits the theme nicely due to being a Grey Warden dagger. Of course, earlier in the game you could purchase the tier 2 version of Thorn of the Dead Gods from Barlin in the Lothering Tavern. It's a pretty good early game dagger, and it keeps you on theme. For swords, I really do think Duncan's sword is best in slot, but you may want to upgrade your Borrowed Longsword into something better until you go to Ostagar to pick it up. You can get 2 good longswords from the Warden's Keep DLC, Asturian Smite, and the crafted longsword Starfang. Asturian Smite is a tier 3 or tier 6 sword with 1 to 2 rune slots depending on what level you are and when you get it, +2 damage, +1 armor penetration, and with the Weakens Nearby Darkspawn property. Unfortunately, in the base game, the Weakens Darkspawn property doesn't work, but it is implemented by the Dane's Fixes mod, granting a -10 penalty to attack and defense to nearby Darkspawn. Starfang is a special tier unique longsword you can craft at Soldier's Peak as part of the Warden's Keep DLC if you bring a meteor ore you found in the random encounter called the Crater to the blacksmith Michael Dryden. You can craft either a longsword or a greatsword, both are very good. The longsword has 3 rune slots, +3 dexterity, +3 damage, and +2.5 armor penetration. There is also a sword that's useful in particular situations when you are up against werewolves or beasts such as wolves, bears, or deepstalkers. The Green Blade. It has 1 rune slot, +6 damage versus beasts, and +10% nature resistance. You can easily get this blade by doing the quest A Missing Child in Redcliffe and convincing Bevan to give you the key to the chest containing the sword, but I only recommend using this blade when you're up against beast or animal enemies. Let's move on to armor. As I said, I believe Duncan wears medium armor, which would make sense considering the fact that he likes to fight up close, suggesting he feels sufficiently protected by his armor. There are unfortunately only a handful of unique medium armors in the game, but I do think they can be great in the right circumstances. First, I'll mention the 2 good armor sets, the Ancient Elven armor set and Wade's Superior Dragonskin armor set. The Ancient Elven armor set is a tier 4 set that has +1 constitution, +2 dexterity, +4 armor, +4% spell resistance, +35% spirit resistance, and the set bonus is +5 defense. This set is particularly good when fighting the Archdemon, which has powerful spirit damage abilities, as there are not that many pieces of gear with good spirit resistance. The extra armor, dexterity, and defense is also quite nice. However, I would say that obtaining the set is a little bit more complicated. On the PC version of the game, you need to have Quinn's Ultimate DAO Fixback in order to include the boots of the set in the Lothering Chantry cabinet, to which you can get a key from the Templar commander Sir Bryant if you ask him for help. You can find the chest piece in the lower ruins of the Brazilian Forest. The gloves can be obtained in the ruined temple during the Urn of Sacred Ashes quest. And finally, the helm can be obtained from the Mad Hermit in the Brazilian Forest if you trade one of a few specific items with him. I highly recommend trading the book you can get from Cammon in the Dalish camp during the side quest Cammon's Lament because it's one of the easiest items to obtain, as well as not otherwise being valuable for selling. Wade's Superior Dragonskin set is a lot simpler to obtain, if not easier, because you need to kill some drakes as well as the high dragon on the mountaintop during the Urn of Sacred Ashes quest to get drake skills and a dragon skill for crafting the armor. Crafting the medium armor means you won't have access to the heavy version of the armor, which is really good for warriors of any kind, as well as arcane warrior mages. However, if you don't plan on using Wade's heavy set, then you can absolutely craft the medium set for this build. The full Superior Dragonskin set has +70% fire resistance, +2 combat stamina regen, +25 stamina, and the set bonuses are -25% fatigue and +5 defense. Remember that you have to craft a drakeskin armor from Wade beforehand and pay him 10 gold when doing so in order for him to be able to craft a superior version of this armor. If you want to go for a more piecemeal medium armor, then the chest piece I recommend using is either the Ancient Elven armor or Varathorn's armor. The Ancient Elven Armor chest piece is tier 4 and offers +2 dexterity, +2 armor, and +10% spirit resistance, and can be obtained in the lower runes in the Brazilian forest as I mentioned. Varathorn's armor is a tier 6 chest piece that has +3 armor, +20% nature resistance, and +25 stamina. You can get it by doing the side quest Rare Ironbark in the Brazilian forest and giving Master Varathorn in the Dalish camp the wood, asking him to either craft you the breastplate, or, if you have good persuasion skills, ask him to craft you both the bow and the breastplate. In terms of helmets, the Ancient Elven Helm would be great in the Archdemon fight due to its +25 spirit resistance. Otherwise, in general, these are the good helmets. There are no other good medium helmets, unfortunately. If you want a light helmet, you could use the Long Runner's Cap, which offers +0.5 combat stamina regen and can be obtained in the Carta hideout from looting Jarvia, as well as the side quest Jammer Stash, also located in the hideout. If you want to use a heavy helmet, go for the Helm of Honleith from the DLC area Honleith Village. It grants +2 to all attributes and +3 to armor. It is, however, a helmet that most characters like to have due to the bonuses to all attributes. In terms of gloves, the Ancient Elven gloves are the best you can get, with +2 armor and +4% spell resistance. If you want to use light gloves, then you could go for the Qunari Siege Gauntlets, tier 4 light gloves that offer +1.5 armor penetration and can be looted from the High Dragon on the mountaintop during the Urn of Sacred Ashes quest. In terms of boots, the best medium boots are the Kadash Stompers, found in the DLC area Kadash Taig if you recruited Shale and completed the Dwarven quest with her still alive. They grant +2 dexterity, +2 armor, +2% ranged and melee crit chance, and increase hostility. You could use the light boots The Lion's Paw, a DLC item which grants +1 armor, +10% chance to dodge, and +10 chance to avoid missiles. As a final option, you can purchase Silverhammer's Tackmasters from Bodan in the party camp, which grant +2 dexterity if you want to use the other 2 boots on someone else or don't have access to them. My personal approach with armor would be mainly to use piecemeal armor and go for whatever pieces were easy to obtain at first, and upgrade to better pieces or sets later in the game. Moving on to accessories. For belts, the 2 best options are DLC items. Cinch of Skillful Maneuvering is a belt you get by completing an achievement in the Witch Hunt DLC, and offers +1 to all attributes, +10% spell resistance, and +10% chance to dodge. Guildmaster's Belt is a DLC belt you should have access to from the start of the game, which grants +3 cunning, +5% chance to dodge, and increased monetary gain. If you don't have access to either of these 2 belts, then I recommend purchasing the Sword Belt from Gorim and Denerim after you complete 3 main quests, which grants +1 armor penetration. For amulets, the insanely overpowered amulet, the High Regard of House Dace, would of course be the best, as it offers +6 cunning, +7% melee crit chance, +1 combat stamina regen, +50 stamina, and +30 chance to avoid missiles. However, it requires completing an achievement in the Golems of Amgarok DLC, which is a very difficult DLC to play through. If you don't have this amulet, you could use a defensive amulet such as Mark of Vigilance, a DLC amulet offering +6 defense, +2% spell resistance, and +5 metal resistance, or perhaps a better amulet similar to this one, Magister's Shield, granting +6 defense, +12 defense against missiles, +4% spell resistance, and -10% nature resistance. The Magister's Shield can be found in the deserted building in Denerim as part of the Last Request side quest. Finally, you could go for a simple but decent amulet that gives you a bit of everything. Pearl of the Anointed. It's a DLC amulet that grants +1 to all attributes. In terms of rings, you want to either use rings that significantly increase your offensive capabilities or significantly increase your defenses. The good offensive rings are Harvest Festival Ring, found in the DLC area Honleith Village as part of the Stone Prisoner DLC. It offers +2 strength, +2 dexterity, and +4 attack. Ring of the Warrior, found at the end of the quest The Drifter's Cache in the Deep Roads. It offers +2 strength and +2 dexterity. The Wicked Oath, a DLC item you should have from the start of the game, offering +10% critical and backstab damage, +1 armor penetration, and +1 combat stamina regeneration. In terms of defenses, the best ring I can recommend is Life Giver, which can be purchased from Garen in the Orzammar Commons. It's quite expensive, but in this build I haven't recommended many expensive things, so that shouldn't be a problem. It grants +10 Constitution, +3 combat health regen, +10 exploration health regen, +3 armor, and +20% to healing effects received. The healing effects bonus doesn't work in the vanilla game, but it is fixed by the mod Dane's Fixes. Finally, an all-around good ring is Key to the City, an item you can obtain from the secret quest The Key to the City in Orzammar. It grants +2 to all attributes, +4% spell resistance, and +10% to healing effects received. Same thing about the healing effects, if you use Dane's Fixes, they'll work. In terms of runes, the most thematically appropriate ones would be Silverette runes, which deal extra damage to Darkspawn. Usually, for rogues, I would first and foremost recommend using Paralyze runes, but if you really want to follow in Duncan's footsteps, I think he'd much rather prefer using damaging runes appropriate for the enemy he's facing. You will have certain quests and areas in which Darkspawn aren't the main enemy or aren't encountered at all. In those cases, I recommend switching your runes into ones that fit the situation. For example, when saving Redcliffe from the undead, it would be useful to use Cold Iron runes, which do extra damage to undead, or Fire runes, as undead are weak to fire. You can also use Fire runes in the Brazilian forest, as beasts aren't resistant to fire, and the Sylvans there are weak to it. In terms of defensive runes, due to the fact that you'll be face-to-face with your enemies, you may also benefit from putting a Hail rune in one of your weapons for some physical resistance, so you're harder to knock down and such things. Ideally, a strong one, such as Grandmaster or Master tier. If you want a Grandmaster Hail rune, you can purchase one from Owen's upgraded stock in Redcliffe if you saved a town and find his daughter Velena in the castle. If you don't want a Grandmaster one, you could use a Master Hail rune from the Wonders of Thedas shop in Denerim. Speaking of Wonders of Thedas, the shopkeeper there also has other good runes for your party: a Grandmaster Flame rune, Grandmaster Paralyze rune, Master Cold Iron rune, and Master Dwemer rune. You can get a Grandmaster Cold Iron rune from Levi Dryden at Soldier's Keep after you've reclaimed the base. Bodan in the party camp also has some good runes as well, a Grandmaster and Master Lightning rune, and some other runes. If you want to get Silverite runes, you can purchase a Grandmaster one from Gorham and Denerim after 3 main quests have been completed. Farron in the Frostback Mountain Pass leading to Orzammar also has one in stock, and it's possible to steal one from Duncan in Ostagar. They can also drop as random loot, so depending on your luck, you could have more than just these. If you feel you don't have enough, you can purchase an Expert Silverite rune from Owen's upgraded store in Redcliffe as well. Let's talk poisons. Since I recommend using damaging runes instead of paralyzing ones, you can make up for the lack of immobilizing effects through poisons. If you're a city elf, you'll have a point in poison making, so that means you can coat your weapons with poisons of any tier while being able to craft tier 1 poisons. I'd recommend maxing out the poison making skill on a different party member such as Liliana, Zevran, or even Morrigan so that they can craft you all the poisons you need. The useful poisons for this build would be the types of poisons that can stun enemies: Deathroot and Concentrated Deathroot Extract, Crow and Concentrated Crow Poison, and Flesh Rot. These poisons will also deal some extra nature damage, but that's not very relevant since many enemies are resistant to nature damage. What you care about is the stun effect. The most potent effect comes from Flesh Rot, which is a tier 3 poison and has a 20% chance to stun for 5 seconds. But in all honesty, even if you use a simple tier 1 Deathroot extract, which has a 10% chance to stun for 3 seconds, that will still be effective since your attacks are quite fast with momentum, as well as possibly getting a further buff from haste if you have a mage in your party. Speaking of your party, let's move on to tactics, where I'll talk about how to execute this build, what party compositions I recommend, as well as any extra tips. I've already explained the best abilities and how to use them in the recommended abilities section, but just as a quick refresher. Have momentum active at all times so you can attack faster, have the dueling sustained active for attack and defense bonuses, and use powerful damaging abilities such as dual weapon sweep, riposte, cripple, and punisher. Use upset balance against targets that seem to have good defenses and are harder to hit. Against bosses or strong elites, use pinpoint strike to ensure that all your warden's attacks will be automatic crits for the next 15 seconds. My usual advice for prioritizing enemies applies. Enemy spellcasters are dangerous, so they're the highest priority, because if they're left to their own devices, they'll wreck you in a fight. Elites and bosses are next in priority, though if there are a lot of normal enemies, I do recommend thinning out the herd. You could get overwhelmed by having too many enemies deal damage to you at the same time. In terms of party composition, I suggest having at least 1 tank, 1 mage, and 1 rogue in your party for balance and utility, and ensure you have 1 melee damager and 1 ranged one. The ranged damager can be an archer or a mage, and the melee damager can be a warrior, rogue, or even the hybrid damager tank arcane warrior mage. Mages can deal lots of damage, especially with area of effect spells like Fireball, Inferno, Blizzard, Tempest, and other smaller ones. But they also have lots of utility for the entire party, being able to heal allies with a heal spell or even group heal if they're a spirit healer, and add extra damage or armor penetration with weapon enchantments like Frost weapons, Flame weapons, and telekinetic weapons. I highly recommend having haste unlocked so your entire party attacks and moves faster. Force Field is a great utility spell that can save one of your allies who is either stuck in a nasty ability such as the Ogre's Grab or various beasts Overwhelm, or if they're unable to heal due to being targeted by Curse of Mortality. Finally, mages also have lots of great CC spells to immobilize enemies. Mind Blast stuns enemies, Winter's Grasp and Cone of Cold can freeze them, and Petrify and Paralyze are also amazing. In terms of tanks, I recommend using heavy or massive armors for them, because the heavier the armor, the higher chance of them being targeted by enemies, alongside, of course, their taunt and threaten abilities. While your warden won't be as squishy as other rogues, you still can't be the tank for your team, so I recommend having at least one tank in your party, whether that's Alistair, Sten, or Shale, or Ogren, but only if you respecialize him or have the no autoscaling past level 7 tweak from Dane's fixes. If you plan on using another rogue in your party, I recommend building them as an archer so that you have damage type variety between melee and ranged. If you're going to use a supporter mage other than the healing spells and haste, Heroic Offense is great to use on a melee or ranged damager to increase their attack, and Heroic Aura and Heroic Defense are great to use on tanks. But regardless of my recommendations, above all else is the golden rule. Play however is fun for you. If you feel comfortable enough with the game to experiment with builds and party compositions, go for it. In conclusion, this Duncan-inspired build isn't as powerful as a fully optimized rogue, but nonetheless I think it's a lot of fun to use it from a role-playing perspective. I always love an excuse to recommend medium armors since they're my favorites. In fact, my first ever warden was a rogue using a very similar build to this and wearing medium armor. You can play Origins in many different ways, even if your builds are suboptimal, as long as you follow some basic principles and have a decent sense of how the game works. As a final little piece of advice, I highly recommend that in your Duncan-inspired playthrough, you also think about how you want to roleplay your warden. Make them consider WWDD. What would Duncan do? That way you can have a truly unique experience playing through Origins, roleplaying both the build as well as the decisions your warden makes. I've really enjoyed making this Duncan build, so let me know in the comments if you'd like me to make more builds inspired by Dragon Age NPCs or characters from Dragon Age lore. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this build guide for a dual-wielding rogue warden inspired by Duncan in Dragon Age Origins. If you're looking forward to seeing more of my Dragon Age and RPG videos, do remember to subscribe and leave a like and comment while you're at it too. They really help. This has been B-Tier Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.